Jeffrey Jordan and Megan Hauser with Table Rock Farm, and they'll introduce themselves here in a minute. Have Emmeline Long and John McCauley, and Forrest Watson was going to join us, but he is not here. So he does have some, he is part of the Genesee River Demonstration Farm Network, which we do have a American Farmland Trust has a web page dedicated to the network. So you can find out more about Forrest there. John McCauley and the Table Rock Farm is also part of that network. And so there'll be, John definitely has some information up there now. Megan in the near future will have more information about her from there. So welcome everyone. So what we thought we'd do today is just start off by letting you all introduce yourself. And so I have Table Rock, Emma, and John in that order on my screen. So I'll just go that way. So Megan, if you'd like to get started.
Sure. Today from Table Rock, you have me, Megan Hauser, and we have Jeffrey Jordan. That's why we have this nice split screen. We're very high tech here at Table Rock. So Jeffrey and I may lean in and lean out as necessary while we're speaking. Table Rock's located right in Castile, New York, right on the edge of Letchworth State Park. In fact, part of our land was taken by eminent domain to become part of the park, about 90 acres, way back when in the 1920s. So we're very conscious of our neighbors. We have great farm neighbors. We also have a lot of people visiting that park every year. It's well into the hundred thousands of people. So we recognize our role as dairy ambassadors to all those vehicles and visitors coming by. The farm itself started in 1915 and has grown since that time. At this point, we are dairy. We had started out with sheep and apples and other things, but converted to pretty much wholly dairy and then growing the crops we need to feed those dairy cows. We're milking about 1,150 cows right now. And we also have young stock on the farm, just under 1,000 young stock animals, and then 100 dry cows, which are not milking right now, but will be in the near future. And we're cropping between 1,800 and 1,900 acres of land every year. About half of that is owned and the rest of it we rent, which is a highly competitive neighborhood for renting because, as I said, we have some great dairy farm neighbors here as well. And we're growing about 60 acres, 40 to 60 acres every year of peas that we sell as a cash crop to a processor. The rest is either corn, BMR, or silage corn, as well as hay, alfalfa / grass. And then we do also we're growing cover crops, as Aaron stated, and we're harvesting some of those cover crops, triticale, in the spring when we can for feed for our dry cows and heifers. Anything you want to add, Jeffrey?
Sounds like you did a good job.
Okay.
Okay, so Emma's also joining us. She can explain her situation, but she has a lot of expertise. And so that's why we invited her today. Go ahead.
Sure. So my name is Emmeline Long. I'm located in Western New York between Buffalo and Rochester. Live and work in the Genesee Valley watershed. When Aaron first asked me to do this presentation, I was the crop production manager at CY Farms, but since then have transitioned and I'm now working as a crop manager, sort of an R&D role with Yara North America, which is a very large producer of nitrogen fertilizer as well as foliars. But I'm going to kind of speak to my experience at CY since that's what Aaron had initially asked me to do. So CY is a 6,000 acre diversified crop farm that farms between Monroe, Orleans, and Genesee counties in Western New York. Some of it falls into the Genesee Valley watershed, not all of it, but we are in like the Lake Ontario watershed, Oak Orchard Creek watershed, which is part of Lake Ontario. So some important watersheds in our area. I think I said 6,000 acres. I'm not sure if I said that, but 6,000 acres, about half is corn. The rest is alfalfa, soy, wheat, vegetables, both fresh market and processing. So peas, snap beans, and spinach for processing, and fresh market onions. And then they also have a turf farm. And we do have animals as part of the system, the whole farm system, because we custom raise dairy replacement heifers. So we do have manure and forages that go into feeding the cattle. So part of it Majority of our cropping system is cash crops, either through grains or vegetables or turf grass. And the rest is forages, the alfalfa and corn silage for the cows. In terms of a tillage system, mostly conventional till, and we'll get into that in a little while, but do some no-till. I'm not sure of the ratios, but and in terms of cover cropping, it's a little bit different every year. We've tried a lot of different things, and we can talk about some of the challenges and why things change up in some of the later questions. But yeah, I'm happy to speak on behalf of the farm. And if you have questions about the fertilizer industry and that part of it, happy to speak to that as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Emma. Thank you, Emma. And next we have John McCauley. So John, go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your farm.
Hi, everybody. I'm John McCauley. I'm a fourth-generation farmer on McCauley Farms, LLC, Groveland, New York. I farm with my dad, Jim, and my brother, Jeff. We have a diverse operation between farming 1,100 acres of row crops of corn, soybeans, wheat, and alfalfa. And then we also have a small 70 cow-calf beef operation, and we sell seed for LG Seeds. We were a conventional till farm till about 2008 when we switched to zone building and no-till. Then 2012, we incorporated cover crops. And in 2014, we switched to 100% no-till, and I've been doing no-till ever since.
Okay. So next, I think we'll just kind of open this up. It's kind of hard to know the best way to do this with virtually, but this whole theme today is about nutrient management and no-till systems. And so, but in general, if you need to just focus on one of those or the other, that's okay. So maybe again, if we talk to Jeffrey and Megan first and ask them about your fertility management. So your sources of fertility, how do you make these decisions on nutrient management, soil testing, the nitrogen recommendation tools you use, that sort of thing. So, do you use split applications, that sort of thing. So go ahead, Megan and Jeffrey.
Sure. Before we do that too, Aaron, I should have introduced the different roles Jeffrey and I have on the farm too. I'm the owner of the farm, fourth generation, like John mentioned, he is on his farm. Jeffrey, however, has a much longer tenure at the farm than I have. Jeffrey, you came in 1974, right, Jeffrey? So yes. I was pretty much almost in diapers when Jeffrey got here. And Jeffrey's been the long-term person that has been a staunch believer in no-till and the cover crops. So really an expert in those areas and has gone through every step of making that happen on the farm and generally been the driving force that really has pushed and continues to push everyone along in that area. So he's now semi-retired, but is not retired at all during cropping season, because I think you've been here every day since we got started, right, Jeffrey? Yeah. So glad that he can be part of talking about things today too. So I might let you talk a little bit about the question Aaron had.
Okay. I went to a meeting once and there's a fellow there who talked about, Ray Rawson was his name, and he was talking about the zone tillage and stuff like that. And I came home and talked to Megan's father about getting one of those zone builders, and we tried it, and we adopted that and got rid of the plow. We quit plowing, and I'd say probably 2000 we sold the plow, and we were using the zone builder, and we made a hitch for it, and we put a airway behind it, and we were doing all our crops like that with a zone builder and an airway tool. And we plant 15-inch row of corn, so I never tried to get on the slot because of the 15-inch corn. It was basically tilling the whole surface, and so that was working pretty good for a while. And then we had put cover crops on before that. We spread them with with the fertilizer spreader and harrow it in the fall, and then after that we started instead of harrowing, we would spread manure on it after we spread the cover crop on, and that was get it going pretty good that way without doing the tillage. And nowadays we use a grain drill, and I think we get just about every seed to grow that way. It works pretty good with a grain drill. Let me see.
He asked us to talk a little bit about what do we use for fertility on the farm. So whether.
Yeah, we Western New York Crop Management does our soil testing and so forth, and we don't use much fertilizer. We're basically all just pop up in the corn planter, and the manure takes care of all our other needs. And they adjust our manure rates according to what Western New York Crop Management says we need to put on. And
do you do any split application in your corn, or do you just put stuff, just the manure?
no, it's all manure and the pop up at planting. We don't do any nitrogen application after that.
Okay.
No, well, a couple times we have. We actually sprayed on with a sprayer, but that just happened to be in a wet year. We did a few fields like that, but normally we don't put any nitrogen on during the season.
Okay.
And,
All right. So we might come back to this in a minute, but I want to make sure we have enough time. So I'm gonna and we'll come back and talk a little bit more about tillage and integrating some other systems into your operation. So you're not done. You're not off the hook yet, Jeffrey. But we're gonna
okay.
gonna move over to I'll go to John next, and then so John, if you could go ahead and talk a little bit about if you could focus right now a little bit on your nutrient management part of it and how and your no-till. Go ahead.
So we do a lot of our own soil sampling there. We're on a 3-year program doing soil samples. We sort of take a whole field average across it, and for the rest of our fertility there, we sort of treat every field the same. We do split applications of nitrogen on all of our crops, and we don't have very much manure anymore since we went to a cash crop operation, and we just really have evolved into just doing a lot more split applications and putting it all on at one time, hitting it when the crop actually needs it instead of putting it all out there and hoping for it to hold on to it as a reserve and put it out there. And the cover crops have also sort of helped in this aspect of it, keeping all the nutrients right in that spot right where we put them, with the roots and everything holding them together. And we're trying to build some nutrients with the cover crops.
Yeah, you've shared with me in the past about your ultimate goal in terms of using cover crops for your nutrient management. And so
Yep.
could you talk a little bit about that? Just, what that is. I could say it, but I think it's
So we're trying to look more into this regenerative ag program sort of for our farming operation, where we're trying to reduce more of our synthetic fertilizers and rely more on what our cover crops can do for us. And we might still need to supplement, some nitrogen or something in that process. But I want to get sort of more towards not so much an organic system, but that's sort of a mindset. But I still can use fertilizer if I need to get there and get all your biologicals and all in the soil all working together to make up for your fertilizer programs and things like that.
Okay. So we'll come back to you again, John, and we do have a question coming in, but I'll get to that in a minute. So go ahead, Emma, if you could talk a little bit about what you were doing.
Sure. So because I don't think I said the size of our heifer raising operation at its peak was about 3,200 cows. So we have a lot of manure, both solids and liquid. But 6,000 acres is spread over 3 different counties, so we're limited to where we can put it, right? Manure is very heavy, it's a liquid. So we focused on nutrient management with manure incorporated into the system closer to home. And a lot of that is just for logistics and economic reasons. So I would say maybe about a third of the 6,000 acres. So about 2,000 acres got manure in some capacity annually. And up until last fall, they had a separator that basically squeezes the manure, separates the liquid from the solids. The liquid goes into the lagoon, the solids form a nice big pile. So to answer the question that just came up of do we use compost? The answer is sort of no, is mostly no, but we would take those solids, and we had a couple of storage locations that were farther from the farm. You can more economically move the dried solids than the liquids. So we would take those and kind of stockpile them at locations farther from the farm and kind of let it sit and naturally compost. It wasn't an official compost pile in that sense, but it was composting because we would, do that throughout the summer. And then when crops were harvested in the fall, that those solids would be applied. Other than the manure, the other 2/3 are mostly inorganic fertilizer that is custom done by the field, and we soil sample every 3 years, more frequently on our vegetable fields. The vegetable fields got soil sampled before the vegetable in the rotation so that we could easily customize the the fertilizer by the crop and by the field. And the fertilizer is adjusted based on that. In terms of nitrogen, about half to 2/3 went on up front, and then we came back in for side dressing. So I don't know if you consider that a split application, but we did come in with side dress, and we have pushed that timing later in the season because we now have Y drops on the sprayer that allow us to apply that nitrogen at side dress closer to when the crop is actually utilizing it. So those are kind of some of the changes that we had made in the last couple of years.
I appreciate that. So John or Megan, do you guys want to address John, I'll start with you. Do you have compost on your farm, or are you utilizing compost?
We are not utilizing compost at the moment.
Okay. And
We've looked into it though.
Okay. And Megan?
We clean our pack barns and we pile that out in the field, and then in the fall we start spreading that. We just composted from the time we clean the barn till we spread it, which might be 6 months, and that be as long as it would be composted. That and spoilage off the bunk silos and stuff gets mixed in there too.
Yeah, so that's a mix of straw bedding, manure, and paper bedding for that compost, along with what Jeffrey said, that spoiled silage.
Okay. And then it wasn't really clear if, like, for you guys, well, for Emma and John, because you guys, Table Rock addressed it, but how do you make your determinations when you are doing the split applications? What sort of tools are you using for that? So John, how do you know how much nitrogen to put on it in the middle of the season?
So we're using a green seeker, a handheld green seeker, and we're also using pre-side dress nitrogen, a PSNT test to do that. And basically we're just looking at what we got for yield goal and also seeing what that's going to take to get to that point. Make sure we get that yield goal every year.
Okay. And how long have you been using those tools, like the green seeker? And
so we've been using the green seeker probably about 3 years now. PSNT tests maybe 4 or 5 years. Been using a little bit of that.
Yeah.
We don't do every field. We just sort of do a broad spectrum of the fields are in that area. We broke the farm down into like 3 different sections, and we'll go to each of those sections that represents each of those fields the best and take the test that way. And it's sort of the cheaper way of doing it, but it gives us a broad spectrum of what exactly it's going to take to get to there.
And how you find success with that?
Oh, what's that?
With- You're finding success with that approach. It seems to be working to maximize your yields.
Yes. Yep. Then just at splitting it up there, not having so much out front and being able to just sort of hit it when the crop actually needs it instead of hoping that it's going to get to it when it needs it.
And you're finding the recommendations that you're getting from the soil test and the green seeker is working okay?
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, it could be better, but I mean, we're using what we got right now to justify it.
Okay. And how about you, Emma? Do you know what were you using to get your recommendations?
A lot of different things. So I have a very complicated Excel file. For every field, I would input the all of the soil data that we had, historical yields, our yield goal, whether or not there was, red clover or soybeans or alfalfa or another legume in the mix, how much manure we applied, and all of that kind of spit out for me, mostly using our yield goal, the nitrogen need minus all the different credits that I gave it for different things. And my starter fertilizer was was phosphorus based, because we've found that we have fairly low phosphorus levels on a lot of our fields. As I mentioned, only about 2,000 out of the 6,000 fields regularly get manure, and on those extra 4,000 acres there we do have a lot of low P levels. And just from balancing the starter mix, you don't get as much nitrogen in the starter when you are balancing for P. So I would basically take the remaining balance and apply that through the Y drops at side dress. I was using for a couple of years the 360 soil scan that's produced by the same company, 360 Yield, that makes the Y drops, and we got that the same year that we got the Y drops. But I didn't use it the last 2 years because I just don't have confidence in it. Like John, I was sampling, basically doing a PSNT, but analyzing it in my in-office lab. It's supposed to, you kind of, what's your yield goal? What stage is the corn at? And then it measures the nitrate right in the office. But what I was finding was that, the fields that we applied manure up front were giving me recommendations for higher nitrate for more nitrogen needed, because there was less nitrate in the soil than fields where we had very low N in our starter. Then they said, oh, you don't need any more. So I didn't have a lot of confidence in that, knowing the field history. And I know that, a couple of years we had really dry Mays and Junes, which would have impacted, the N in the soil, and the other years it was really wet, but it just didn't seem to line up with what I understood of nitrogen dynamics and our soil practices, manure history. So I stopped using that and kind of went more to my, N balance strategy and yield goals.
All right. That sounds great. And thank you. So, and I would, as the three of you were talking, like you all also have different constraints in your nutrient management. So like the Table Rock farm, having the animals would be needs to follow the regulations more closely. And so relying more on the crop consultant. And I guess you were a crop consultant of Emma, hired specifically for the one farm. And then John, you got rid of your animals. But that allows you a different approach than maybe Table Rock has, where they have the animals that have to follow.
Well, I will say though, because we had the animals, we were a CAFO.
That's right.
The farm is a CAFO. And even though only 1/3 of the acreage ever got manure, we had to have that nutrient management plan as if we were applying that manure to all 6,000 acres. And that was, we did feel like that was a constraint a lot of times for the nutrients we could apply, because it didn't matter that the field never got manure, never would. We still had to build our nutrient management plan based under those regulations, which I think are great. They're definitely needed, but there were times where it was felt constraining.
Yeah, just another piece of this, though. It's another layer of decisions making a farm would have to deal with is the regulation part of it. All right, so switching to tillage. And so again, if folks have questions, don't be shy to throw some out. We'll have time at the end too. But like with Jacob's question about the compost, if something comes up, I'm just facilitating this, but by no means do I have the treasure chest of questions for everyone to ask. So don't be shy. So let's move into the more the tillage side. If you guys want to go ahead and talk a little bit about, again, what made your decision to transfer to a reduced tillage system, what type of equipment and why, some of the challenges that you might have had early on or still face. And yeah, are you doing like different kinds of tillage and different crops, that sort of thing. And then, yeah, changes, improvements in soil, improvements in your bottom line. Yesterday, I did share about the economic case studies, and John is one of those that has already been analyzed, and Table Rock will be one, whether they remember being asked about it or not. You will be getting an economic study done, hopefully, if you guys are willing to participate. But and so, yeah, we saw that reducing tillage really helped John save some money and help him. It offset costs for him to do some other stuff on his farm. So again, we haven't heard from Table Rock for a while, so I'll start with you guys. And if you want to talk, Jeffrey, a little bit about, you did already mention a little bit about what you were doing, but maybe if you can address, more specifically, how you transitioned, some challenges you had, and any changes that you've noticed in the, couple decades that you've been doing it.
Some challenges that I personally had was just trying to get the people around me to jump on board. We used to plow, and then we started with a zone builder and the airway thing. And there was a couple people on the farm that were pretty hesitant to follow along. And Megan's father, he was on my side, so that helped a lot. They were worried about the hood falling off the chopper because the fields were rougher and stuff like that. They weren't as smooth as when you plow and you harrow them a bunch of times. And it was a little bit tough in the beginning, but then a couple of years into it, everyone saw how the fields were getting softer. The soil was getting better. It was much softer, and we had less erosion on our hillsides and so forth, where we used to have quite a bit of erosion. And it's been making a big difference. Our organic matters, I think, are coming up slowly, but they are coming up. And we're.
Have you noticed some improvement in then water infiltration since the erosion is reduced? Do you notice that, like the soil moisture?
Yeah, we don't have the wet spots that we used to have. That the water penetrates into the soil a lot better.
Did you notice? I mean, did you notice any change in your management? Like, your nutrient management? Or you haven't had to adjust that too much under the no-till? Have you noticed?
Well, we used to put nitrogen on mid-season regularly every year. And since we started raising 15-inch row corn, that's when that stopped. We just started using a manure injection to retain all our nitrogen in the soil rather than top spreading. We used to top spread before that. But when we started injecting manure, we were able to retain enough nitrogen that we didn't have to put nitrogen on mid-season, and it's been working for us.
I want to add in too, Jeffrey. So Jeffrey makes it sound like it's in the past that we have people that continually think about whether or not we should be following these practices. I think everyone's on board for cover crops, but there are different challenges when you're going to no-till or transitioning to no-till that continue to be there. We're really fortunate to have a team that cares immensely about what happens on the farm, and everyone has the same goal of growing the best crops we can for the cows to eat. But as probably everyone listening knows, there sure are a lot of approaches to doing that. And so having good background information, having good advisors that we can talk to, and being prepared for some of the back and forth that you'll see, because every growing season is different. Every spring is going to present itself a little bit of a different way. And especially one that's as early as this has been, people get nervous about things. So it's an ongoing discussion about what we're doing. And so I think if others that are listening are dealing with more than themselves to figure out what to do, being aware that it's good to be able to talk back and forth about the different challenges and the things that make sense, or the things you might encounter. I think, Jeffrey, you mentioned too, yesterday you heard Dr. Van Ness talking, the book that he has about the building soils for better crops. That was a huge tool for encouraging people to think about a better way to look at the soils, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
So there are good resources out there. And probably,
Definitely.
Aaron, that's off topic of what you were thinking about, but I didn't want to miss that point either.
No, that's all part of it. That's a very important part, because it's, some of us that are on this call, we're trying to convince several farmers to do these practices, but within a farm, you still have that same debate. So I find that interesting, that like not everyone's necessarily 100%, because they all have different goals and different needs as being a worker on, or a contributor to the farm operation. I haven't really thought about that as much.
Well, all same final goal of growing the best crops, but different approaches.
Different approaches. Yes. Different approaches. Yeah. So yeah, I appreciate that. That's really interesting. And then the one thing that you may have said, but how much of your farm are you doing the it's no-till, right? And it's how much, like, is it 100%, or is it like just certain crops, or
20% probably.
Yeah.
We do no-till on the killed sods. The fall killed in the fall, and then in the spring we no-till. Nothing's done to it whatsoever. I go in there with a planter and no-till plant it. And then we've done some no-till on triticale after we've harvested it in the spring. We no-till the alfalfa into that, and that's been working pretty good.
You've been experimenting with planting into living cover crops too.
Yeah, we took some alfalfa first cutting off, and then we planted into that after manure injection. We inject the manure on it, and then we planted into that. We've done that 2 years, I believe now, and that's working pretty well too. Yeah, so it might be a little bit more than 20% maybe with that all in mind.
all right, we'll give you
And
credit.
then we're doing the cover crops and trying to do more planting green into that. But that's where we're having some head butting, is we're injecting manure into that, and with the coulter injectors, and we get these slots in the ground that some of them are still open, and sometimes we have little divots in the soil where they made spots where there's an open spot, and we're trying to decide how the best way to handle that is. And we've been talking about the idea with a roller harrow, maybe just going in with a teeth just down an inch or two, just to try to do the leveling, because of the soil doesn't all fall right back where it's supposed to, and just to make it a little bit smoother so that everything works good.
Yeah, we had some extra challenges really, Aaron, because if we top spread everything, sure, I think it would be very easy to not worry about, like Jeffrey's talking about, these divots or channels that are showing up with the injectors, but we really want to make the most of the manure and nutrients that we have, and that's done by injecting. So we add some additional challenges for ourselves by choosing specific tools we want to use and trying to figure out how to make it as close to no-till as we can.
All right. I'll go ahead and go to John again. And so John is 100% no-till, if I remember correctly. And but go ahead and talk a little bit about how you got started and some of the equipment you're using and challenges and that sort of thing.
So we got started in 2008 there, just experimenting with a little bit of no-till and zone building. Then seeing it was working good, we've slowly transitioned. We started out no-tilling wheat and soybeans. and zone tilling corn. And then we jumped into it. We jumped into cover crops in 2012 with just a 3-way mix. We were planting into that green. That was working good. 2014, we started with much success. We went 100% no-till, and we're also, we're still planting in green on everything that we do for the most part. We're trying to get, as soon as we get our weed off, we'll go in there, we'll plant a 11-way cover crop mix. And then in the fall time there, after corn and soybeans there, we'll go into with either cereal rye or winter wheat for a cover crop. And we're no-tilling right into direct alfalfa green.
Okay. Yeah. So, so it sounds like though it took you, several years. I also think, at least for the cover cropping part, when you started in 2012, you got some cost sharing. Did you get cost share for the no-till as well?
Yep. So we went through NRCS there, and we went through the quit program there. We first started off with the no-till program that they had, and did that on 200 acres. And I was looking for that next piece of the puzzle on what exactly to do. So cover crops. So he said, oh, we might as well give those a shot and see what those do. So we jumped into multi-species cover crop with cost sharing from the NRCS. And it's nice to have these little stepping stones, because without this, it's really hard to, unless you got lots of money, to transition into this, because it's getting into no-till. It's sort of a costly adventure because there's so many different things out there to try. And I'll go to meetings and give presentations, and somebody else, has always got a different idea that, man, I'd love to try that, but how much is it going to cost me on the back end to try this? And you want success with everything you do, but a lot of it's going to be trial and error. Like some of the things when we first started no-tilling, we had a lot of hairpinning going on from burning down that cover crop too early, where the seed, we weren't getting good seed to soil contact. So planting into a green there, it was just open the seed slot, and the roots would move out of the way a little bit with that coulter. So you're definitely getting seed to soil contact. And another problem we had was, before we started using cover crops, one of our main problems was the dandelions were reaching full maturity at the same time we were going in there and planting corn. Well, we really never noticed it when we had a finger pickup meter, but when we went to a vacuum planter, all those little hairs off the dandelions were getting stuck on our meters, and it'd screw up our seed spacing. So with cover crops in there and the diverse mix that we use, it sort of keeps the dandelions at bay and all the other weeds that you don't want. And you're going out there and you have something that you can control easily with a little bit of herbicides and do it that way. And it's also helping us so we don't have to use pesticides and fungicides. We've pretty much taken pesticides and fungicides right out of our system, unless we actually deem it necessary. So we're doing a lot more scouting in that before we go out there. And, because the worst part is they don't just kill the bad insects, but they kill the good insects too. Same with the fungi.
Yeah, that's great. So Emma, you want to talk about your experience?
Sure. When I first started at CY just over 7 years ago, they were doing a lot of strip till, but that wasn't working out well. I think that people at the farm liked to blame it on heavy soils, but there's a lot of people with heavy soils that are doing strip till well. I like to blame it on the fact that you have 2 nice days of warm weather in the spring and you feel like you're 2 weeks behind. And so getting people to slow down and wait until soil conditions are right for certain practices is so incredibly difficult. I see Megan and Jeffrey nodding. People is really hard to deal with when you've got, a lot of people who in ag who think what they're doing is right. It's really hard to get them to slow down and consider something different. And it's really easy to blame the equipment. It's really easy to blame the soils, when in reality, it's just trying to be patient with a lot of these things. So anyway, sold the strip tiller, bought a bigger planter, But the bigger planter had better equipment, better row cleaners, better seed spacing, things that allowed us to plant into conditions that we maybe wouldn't have been able to plant into before. So like Table Rock, we're no-till planting into alfalfa. We were trying to do that in the spring, but our Mays and Junes the last few years have been really dry, and we had a lot of issues with the alfalfa drying out the soil too much. So then we didn't have great corn emergence. So this year switched to killing it in the fall, and then it'll be, I'm not there. So I'm hoping the plan was that it would be no-tilled into in the spring. We also, weather dependent, try to no-till into all the soybean stubble. So that's about 750 acres. It's going to kind of depend on the crop rotation, but one of the big issues is our falls seem like they're getting wetter and wetter and wetter. And when you've got big ruts through the field from trying to harvest those soybeans in the fall, it's really difficult to try to come in and no-till. But we try to leave soybean stubble and wheat stubble the best that we can to no-till into. The other big area that we do no-till is on our muck soils. So we farm about 1,000 acres of muck soil, so soils that used to be a swamp, now drained 50-ish% organic matter. And because of the erosion issues that we have on those soils, both wind and water erosion, we try to no-till into those soils the best that we can. And that's pretty easy because they're nice and fluffy, so we don't have some of the issues that we do on some of our heavier soils, and can't use some of those excuses.
All right, thank you. We are the time is passing. So I'm gonna move on a little bit to the cover crops, and you guys have all kind of touched on it a little bit. But maybe if we could talk a little bit more about, why actually how cover crops may have helped your systems if they're intertwined with no-till. Did you notice that? Again, John's kind of touched. If you guys have touched on it, that's okay. But just want to make sure we cover all the bases with, has cover crops helped with reduced tillage, and also how has it altered your nutrient management, if at all? And what are the main benefits you're seeing from the cover crops? And then maybe talk a little bit about the general procedures. How, what kind of equipment, species and rates, how do you come up with those? How do you determine those rates? How do you terminate your cover crops? The timing, and that sort of thing. So just kind of, again, obstacles, changes, any other changes you had to make. So, trying to integrate cover crops into this complicated system that's already there. And then some of the benefits that you're seeing. So again, it's been a while since we've heard from Jeffrey and Megan. So I'll start with you guys. If you want to add, just talk a little bit about it.
We're planting oats and rye mixture. And if it's early enough after the harvest, we put a couple pounds of radish in there also. I just mix it with the seed tender. It has 2 hoppers, and I just open each one what I think is going to be 50-50 by volume. And we end up putting about 65 pounds of the total mix on with a grain drill. And the grain drill works pretty well. It gets it growing pretty well. And when we terminated it, they hit it with Roundup in the spring. We used to kill it all as soon as the weather warmed up enough before planting, and basically nothing left at that point when I plant. And I'm trying to push towards more planting green. I think it'll be more beneficial for the soil and create more organic matter and more things for the insects to eat. worms and all that thing, sort of thing. And, you know, I think the ground's getting way softer, and we are gaining a little organic matter over the years. And I can tell quite a bit of difference between our land that we've been farming over some new land that we might have acquired just recently. There's a big difference in the soil texture and everything.
Can I talk a little bit, Jeffrey, about, so Jeffrey mentioned the drill and your method for getting the cover crop mixed. It's also, to me, it's super fun to see at corn harvest time, because everyone is so together and so dedicated to putting on cover crops. You'll see our chopper operator in one end of the field harvesting the corn, and Jeffrey is in the other end of the field drilling on the cover crop, you know, recognizing the sooner we get it in, the better it's going to be. And then as Jeffrey's on that same side of the field, now the chopper's off, Jeffrey's on the other side of the field. Then we have the crew coming in and putting that light coating of manure on the cover crop to encourage it to grow. So that's been a while getting to that kind of precision, but boy, does it make a big difference in how well those cover crops catch. We've also changed, so the day length of our corn. So recognizing again the importance of the cover crops, we've said, let's not plant this 110-day corn. We're planting 101, 102-day corn, so we know there's time to get the cover crop on and get a good catch on it.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear. Again, and the importance of having the team, the farm team being on the same page really makes it all click and facilitates that process. So
yeah,
John,
and then I forgot to mention the triticale. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
The triticale that we're now using to feed to our dry cows and heifers, that has to get on by a certain date. The earlier the better, a certain date in September, or we're just not going to have that as a crop to harvest in the spring. And that's becoming a key part of our feed program, is having that triticale, especially in these dry years like Emma was mentioning, you're not getting the alfalfa yield. And so having that feed stuff for the heifers and dry cows of the triticale is important. So once again, saying getting that cover crop on, if we're going to double crop it, is important too.
Yeah, very good. So we are probably going to go over the few minutes. We did start a little later. I just want to make people aware that we'll probably go over just a few minutes. But John, do you want to talk a little bit, like, again, you know, what you're doing, the equipment, how did you get it? You know, did you find the investment, okay, you know, investing in the new equipment, that sort of thing with your cover crop program? Oh, John, you're muted. Somehow you got muted.
There we go.
There we go.
So the cover crop that we're using, the 11-way mix after wheat, we're using winter pea, oats, clover, buckwheat, hairy vetch, radish, turnips, sun hemp, pearl millet, cereal rye, and sunflowers. With that mix there, we're going to roller crimp that in the springtime and then plant into that. So that's another piece of the puzzle we're doing too. And then
so when you got, you had to purchase, that's okay, you had to purchase the roller crimper, right? So that was a cost.
Yeah.
But how did you go about making that decision? Or
so we rented this roller crimper there from a neighbor farm that they bought one, and they said, you know, it was a 15-footer, and they were farming about 3,000 acres, and they got it for their organic production. So we decided we'd rent that from them. So we rented it, and after 1 year of using it, it worked out pretty good. So we decided we were going to buy that. So like, even with the planter attachments that we'll put on the planter, like, I like to try a little something different every year. And I don't go and, you know, outfit the whole entire planter with it. I'll do maybe two or three rows of it and mark those rows in the field and be able to tell, you know, right here's what I do. So I do everything on a small scale before I jump in and do it on a big scale to make sure, you know, that initial investment, you know, isn't wasted money on that. So a lot of it's just trial and error on a small scale for me.
yeah.
And I mean, it helps from the NRCS with their payments. I don't want to rely on their payments, but to get into this, you know, this way of thinking, it takes a lot of upfront costs, because we started out, we didn't have a no-till drill. So we had to buy a no-till drill, didn't have a zone builder. So we had to buy that. Our corn planter at the beginning was just a conventional planter. So we didn't have the heavy duty springs or airbags on it. So, that's more of an initial cost that you gotta, take that leap of faith and hopefully, everything's gonna pan out in the end.
Yeah.
Which it has, but there's a lot of, with no-till, you always gotta be thinking. It's never just, an easy walk in the park. There's always, stumbling blocks. Every year something different's going on. The weather. And there's been a couple of years where, we couldn't go out there and plant because it was too wet, that we thought was too wet, but where we had cover crops, all the moisture was, there was moisture in the ground, but with the cover crops there, it kept all the mud off the planter and we were still able to get a crop planted.
Very nice. And also just, I shared a link a little bit earlier in the chat where John and also Forrest, who was not with us today, but they did a joint video with us, and you could see the roller crimper. There's just a few, couple seconds here and there, B-roll shots of the roller crimper in action with him following right behind it and planting. So it's a 5-minute video. You take a look at it and hear a little bit more about John's farm. So Emma, did you want to take just a few minutes to talk about the cover crop program a little bit more?
Sure. So historically, they have planted a lot of triticale, 200 to 300 acres a year to be used for forages. It works really well in the rotation. We can put it close to home on good soil, so we don't need any fertilizer, can get manure on, harvest it, manure on, and plant corn in. Just like Jeffrey and Megan were talking about, things happen quickly. So that often went close to home, again, for economic reasons, because we could get it harvested into the bunk really easily if it was planted closer to home, whereas farther away, we didn't plant cover crops that we planned to harvest as a forage. We frost seed red clover into almost all of the wheat acreage, unless we're planning on putting alfalfa after wheat. It gets frost seeded. We've had mixed luck with that. Sometimes it's great, sometimes it's not. We may have one field right next to another that's absolutely beautiful stand, and the next is not worth keeping. So, but that's an investment that they decided to make every year. Not a ton of money, and we could get forage if it was close enough to the farm again. And then if not, you get a legume that's right there and growing after wheat harvest in July. So that was something that they've done for years and years and years. And then we've started experimenting with some different cover crop mixes. Last year we did a ryegrass, tillage radish, something else, and sunflower blend. I'm not remembering what it was. And one of the biggest takeaways from that was, I think, the realization that people are watching, because we had people calling the office directly saying how much they loved seeing the sunflowers. Now, we strategically put them next to a campground that we rent the campground's land. So it was right next to the campground, and all of the people in their RVs at the campground loved seeing the sunflowers, and we put them kind of strategically along some main roads. But the feedback that we got from the community seeing sunflowers in the field in the fall was way more than we ever would have expected. And I think one of the biggest lessons out of that is people are watching and they're paying attention to your practices. They're paying attention to what you're doing. And I think they're, again, I'm not there this spring, so I'm not exactly sure what their plans are. We purposely picked winter kill. So there maybe wasn't ryegrass in it because we chose all species. There was oats in it. I know that. Anyway, we chose species that would all winter kill because that was that was just looking at our system and what we do in the spring. It's very busy trying to get 6,000 acres of crops in the ground. So we needed something that, we could eliminate a pass, an herbicide, roller crimper, something. We could eliminate some passes if we had a crop that winter killed. So anyway, I hope that they continue to do that, if for no other reason than just the positive community feedback that came out of it. But one of the challenges, kind of like Jeffrey and Megan's operation, we don't no-till everything. We no-till based on the crop rotation, the weather, a lot of other factors that I've mentioned. And so I think it's kind of difficult to see the long-term impact. We know that all these things are doing a lot of good, but then you also hear that like, well, yeah, you no-tilled corn into soybean stubble one year, and then the next year you're going corn on corn and you've decided to till. Have you just completely negated everything that you've done that one year? And that's one of the things I think that's kind of difficult, is we feel like we're doing really good things, but it's really hard to see the long-term impact when it's not the same field every year that's getting no-tilled. It's not the same field every year that's getting manure. It's not the same field every year that's getting cover crops, and not the same species. So it's sometimes hard to measure the long-term effects of these things.
Yeah, that's a really key point there in terms of building soil health, because there's, especially in New York, there's these rotations, and so one field isn't getting cover cropped every year, or even tilled or no tilled every year. So it does take longer, even though you're doing the right thing overall on the farm. This one field might get neglected with these practices, 5 out of 6 years. So that's another thing to think about. So we are a little over time, but Amanda did ask I thought a really good question to end the panelists with. So you just think about this, and then and we'll open it up. We haven't gotten other questions in the chat, but so this is your time to put a question in the chat, and then folks that want to ask any questions can stick around. But we thought, we talked a little bit about cost sharing, and also, NRCS is definitely a player, but of course, soil and water conservation districts also have cost sharing programs for these practices. And so we know that those are available. There's also equipment rental options, but what other ways, because, not everyone has access to, especially the rentals. What other ways, or neighbors that have the equipment? So what other ways can trial or error, or experimenting with different techniques can be supported? How can risk be removed from trying some of these soil health practices without going all in on a piece of equipment, or even, taking on the cost sharing piece? Is there other things that you would recommend in terms of trying trial and error? So this time I'll mix it up a little and start with John.
So when I don't know, some of the key to my success there is asking, there's a bunch of farmers that I've known for a while there, and we have it's sort of like a peer group. If one of us has a question about something, we can call the other one, and the same goes for, if they've tried something, they didn't, it didn't work out good for them, well, maybe they got it laying, like closing wheels. There's probably about 100 different kinds of closing wheels. Well, if you find a closing wheel on the internet and you're like, man, this is a nice one, but it's $200. Well, maybe one of the neighbors, that's, that you talk to, maybe they've tried this closing wheel and they got it laying over there in the junk pile. Well, they might just give you that closing wheel to try on your corn planter for that, time and get, save you the $200, or else, you try it and you return it. I gave a couple of my closing wheels there to some of the farmers I work with, just to try, to try something different, try to get into this way of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah. So relying on your neighbors and your other peers, people who are kind of doing the same thing. I know you and Forrest have a pretty good, close relationship and talk a lot about stuff that you're doing. Yeah. So, and I'm sure you have some other things, but I need to move it along. So, and so Emma, I'll go with you, and then we'll wrap up with Table Rock and what they might suggest in terms of what to do. So go ahead.
Sure. So I've been thinking about the question that Amanda had: how can the risk be removed from trying some of these practices? And I think the best way to put it to growers is, anytime you put a seed in the ground, you are taking a risk. You're taking a risk that you're not going to get the weather, that your fertilizer might wash away in crazy rainstorm. Farmers are used to risk, and they're used to trying new things, because a seed salesman shows up at your farm one day and they say, hey, you have this variety of corn. We're not going to have that next year. Try this new one. And it's very easy for them to say, yeah, sure, bring it over. But they're not going to convert 100 of their acres or 100% of their acres to this new corn variety. They're going to try it on a select few acres before they decide to go big, and that's going to be their only variety that they plant. So I think when you're trying to communicate to growers, like, how do you eliminate the risk? I don't know if this is where you're going because I see the cost share programs and stuff questions ahead of that, but this is how I'm interpreting it. You're
No,
not going to eliminate the risk. You're putting a seed in the ground, whether it's cover crops or your cash crop, you're taking a risk, and farmers understand that. This should be no different. And if you're concerned about it, try it on a small bunch of acres like John was talking about. Experiment with it. Get your handle on it before you decide to scale up. It's no different than implementing any other practice, whether it's a new herbicide, a new chemical, a new seed, even a new crop. And soil health practices should be no different than implementing any of those other things.
Yeah, that's good. I remember Don Branton always talks about when his first field that he tried it on, and it was like small acreage, but it was in a field way away from the road, tucked behind other fields so that no one could see him, making mistakes. So that one always cracks me up, but that's probably a part of it too. It's like, you don't want to just have this disaster right along the highway, where everyone's going to see. So that kind of reminded me of Don's story.
But sometimes that's a conversation starter. And sometimes, most people aren't going to see it, but in the ag community, you do want your crops to look good for all the people who do understand it. But like John said, it could be a conversation starter with your neighbor who can say, hey, I noticed this didn't go so well. Let me help you out.
True. Yeah, that's true too. So having that peer group is also important. Megan and Jeffrey, do you have something to share on this topic?
Emma covered it well. I think, if anyone could tell me how to remove the risk from dairy farming, I'd love to talk to them about that. The one other thing that Jeffrey and I were talking about, we've appreciated working with Karine Ketterings and the Spear Nutrient Group at Cornell, because when we have some of these ideas, they've helped us quantify them. They'll come out and do a test plot on our farm, and being able to see how that actually unfolds. Thinking about the proper depth for zone building, or we're looking at some different treatments for our no-till fields this year. We appreciate having that kind of thoughtful research done on our farm too, much like what you're doing, Aaron. Having research on the farm is a great thing if you can have it.
And on the farm equipment side there, if I see something that I think would work good on my planter for closing the furrow or whatever it might be, I'll usually order a couple for 2 rows or something like that and try it before adopting the thing for the whole planter, and that works pretty good for me to figure it out. Because when you get I have a 24 row planter, and when you put all that stuff on every row, it's expensive.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate everyone staying on late. We did go late, but I didn't want to end this good discussion. To have you 3 here, 3 groups, 3 windows I'm looking at. It's just really a unique opportunity to have this. And so I appreciate all of your time and all your input and being vulnerable, talking about your farm and what you're doing. And so thank you very much to the farmer panelists.